Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, my own website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz or at Banking Day. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from my website, leongettler.com. I am Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. This is episode number 14 in our series for 2024, and today's date is Friday, May the 3rd. First, I'll be talking to Ben Weiss, CEO and co-founder of the platform Olive, to learn more about how Australians are using crypto, the importance of making it more accessible, the impact of crypto on the local economies, tips for first-time traders, and the future of crypto in Australia as it becomes a key player in the market. And I'll be talking to economist Saul Eslake about Australia's housing crisis. But first, let's talk to Ben Weiss.
Well, Ben, tell us about the rise of crypto and what it means for Australians.
It's great to be on your show. Crypto is definitely on the rise. We've seen Bitcoin up over 50% since the beginning of the year. And I think in times of uncertainty and interest rates are also going up, people are going towards hard assets. And crypto and Bitcoin is a hard asset. There's only 21 million Bitcoins. There'll never be more. And we're seeing all the great things associated with blockchain and crypto come to the forefront. I think it's going to be a great year for crypto.
This is also taking off in Australia.
Correct. And we're based in the US, but we just recently entered Australia about 6 months ago. We have 300 Bitcoin ATMs now, and it's been performing incredibly well. I mean, I was shocked in a positive way with how well the locations are performing, which tells me there's massive demand for cryptocurrency in Australia. And I think Australia is a very forward-leaning country when it comes to payments, when it comes to payments technology, and obviously blockchain and Bitcoin's at the forefront of that.
What can explain this great interest in Bitcoin and crypto? Why now?
I think if you look around you, there's so much uncertainty going on, from the interest rates to the banks collapsing. And I think too, with COVID, people really started taking their financial destiny more seriously, not just in crypto, but if you saw more people were, on Robinhood buying their own stocks and things like that during COVID. So I think COVID sort of changed people's mindset to take control of their financial destiny. And how can you take better control of your financial destiny than with crypto? I mean, that's the whole point of crypto, is to be your own bank. And I think that's why it's so appealing to Australians.
In a way, crypto democratizes finance, doesn't it? You would agree with that?
100%. I could send a Bitcoin to you with no bank, no intermediary, no government between us. And I think that's the promise that's so alluring to people.
Do you think banks are cottoning onto it?
Well, I think banks are catching on to it. And I think a lot of banks are looking at, hey, we're a bank. We have this infrastructure around us. We have financial services. How do we incorporate blockchain technologies to, because I think the banks understand that if they don't incorporate blockchain and crypto at some point, they might have issues. They might become dinosaurs. So I do think not just banks, but traditional finance in general is looking to incorporate Bitcoin and blockchain. I don't know if you saw recently, but there were a lot of announcements with Visa and MasterCard. They were exploring it as well. I know Walmart, Facebook, they're all taking big bets on the metaverse. So a lot of these big companies, beyond just banks, are looking to incorporate the newest technology with blockchain.
How far off are we from getting digital currencies worldwide?
Well, I think we're already there in the sense that we have digital currencies in terms of we have Bitcoin. Most of the money is already electronic. If you're talking about central bank digital currencies, a CBDC, I think that's going to vary a lot based on the region. I know China is well ahead with their CBDC. I know the US is more behind, and I think Australia is somewhere in the middle. So I think we're going to see sort of a country by country approach, but let's be honest, that's where everything is going. I think everything is becoming digital, and governments are realizing, just like banks, that blockchain is so much more than Bitcoin and that they can capitalize from the same technology that underlies cryptocurrency.
I mean, but there are still some concerns from central banks about it, aren't there?
Yeah, with any new technology, there's always concern. I mean, look at the internet in the early 2000s. I mean, 20 years later, the internet is an obvious given. We don't even really think about it as special anymore. But think about everything that was going on in 2000. I mean, people were scared to even type in their credit cards online. I remember even growing up, my parents were scared to do that. And now it's so commonplace. So it'll take time, but this is like any new technology. And I think it is important, technology has pluses and minuses. So the way we adopt technology should be responsible. And I think it's, everything should be questioned. But overall, I think that crypto is here to stay. And whether it's a bank or the government, everyone's looking at how they can incorporate blockchain technology.
So given that it's now more accessible, what will be the impact on the local economy?
Well, I think the impact, I know for us, we've installed over 300 locations now of these Bitcoin ATMs, and we're paying rent to convenience stores, to malls. So I think it's a plus for the local economy. And I think that cryptocurrency, it's cool. A lot of the young people like it. It's hip. So I think it's bringing people, brick and mortar has been struggling lately, but I think these kiosks that we've been installing are bringing foot traffic into those locations. So I know I've heard a lot of positive things from the store owners. And I think just in general, the countries beyond just the Bitcoin ATMs, now talking crypto more generally, the crypto is here to stay, right? So the countries that embrace cryptocurrency, the countries that provide a smart framework with regulation that protects consumers, but also encourages innovation, those are the countries that are going to own the future. Like, look at the countries that were open towards the internet and look at the countries that weren't. And it's going to be the same way with the same outcomes for crypto and blockchain.
What would be your tips for first-time traders in crypto?
Never invest more than you're willing to lose. Do your research. And one thing I see people do a lot of the time is they want to find the next Bitcoin, right? So they're looking for coins that are 3 cents or 4 cents or 5 cents. And those coins are probably 3 or 4 cents for a reason. So I would say avoid the shiny objects. Sometimes the most boring coin, the most stable coin is the best coin. And Bitcoin's been around the longest. Ethereum's also very solid. I'm not a financial advisor, but I see a lot of people try and get into these smaller coins, but there's smaller coins for a reason. So I always tell people stick with the basics. And at this point, I think, personally, I think it's smart to have some exposure to cryptocurrency. Again, Bitcoin's been one of the best performing assets of the past decade, and it's up over 50% from the beginning of the year.
But the issue with Bitcoin and all cryptocurrencies is their volatility. Like one day they're worth a lot, and next day they've crashed. What kind of confidence does that put in people?
Well, that's why it's so important to never invest more than you're willing to lose. If you're taking your rent money and you're saying, hey, I'm going to put my rent money into Bitcoin, I think that's a terrible idea. So there is volatility like any investment. And I think personally, if you're buying an asset, you should believe in it and you should have confidence in it. If you do your research with crypto and you don't believe in it, don't buy it, because then when the price goes down for a couple of days, you might get nervous and sell it for a loss. So I would say do your research and only buy any sort of asset, any sort of coin or stock, if you truly believe in that company or in that coin. Because if you don't, you'll be tempted to sell it when the times get tough. But if you hold on to things long enough, most stuff usually goes up.
Okay, so you need to have confidence in what you're investing in. But
confidence, long-term horizon, and don't spend more than you're willing to lose. Because if the price goes down and you need to pay rent, you don't want to be forced to liquidate.
But at the same time, for goodness sake, do some research and take care.
100%.
So what do you see the future of cryptocurrency worldwide, for a start?
Right now, I think cryptocurrency is mainly an asset. So people are buying it, they're investing in it. But I think over time, we're going to see more and more use cases of cryptocurrency where it's going to be used more for utility, such as remittances, such as in the metaverse. For instance, stable coins. We're already seeing stable coins have a lot of use in Africa and Latin America. And stable coins are cool because they have all the benefits of cryptocurrency. They're out there on an open public ledger, but they don't have the volatility of Bitcoin or Ethereum. So I think we're going to see more and more applications of crypto and blockchain associated with use cases versus just investing.
And it would be very good for paying bills, wouldn't it?
Yes, stable coins would 100%. Bitcoin, Ether, that's a little more difficult because of the up and down volatility.
So where do you see the future of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in Australia?
Well, I'm incredibly bullish. I mean, just by the feedback we've gotten, just by the use we're seeing at the kiosk, it's clear to me that Australia is a country that's at the forefront of finance, that Australia is at the forefront of technology. And I think crypto has a bright future in Australia. That being said, I think there's a lot of things in flux right now. So the thing for any country is to get, if there's going to be regulation, to get that regulation right. We have to protect consumers, and we have to inspire confidence in the market, and we have to encourage innovation. So Australia is off to a great start with cryptocurrency. We see a ton of use cases, a ton of volume there. But I would say now more than ever, thoughtful frameworks are super important, because that could also get the bigger institutions involved as well when they see a more thought out framework.
Which is why we're going to need good legislation and good laws surrounding crypto worldwide. That be right?
Yes, 100%. I think the more standardized the laws and the legislation are, I think a lot of crypto companies, they just want to know the rules of the road, right? And think about, for instance, someone like my mom, she might feel more comfortable buying cryptocurrency if she knew it was a regulated product or if it came from a regulated entity. So I think any sort of regulation that is done smartly and done thoughtfully is actually good for the market. And I've never seen an industry like we're seeing in cryptocurrency that is begging for thoughtful and unified regulation.
Well, Ben, it's been fantastic talking to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here and love to see everything going on with crypto in Australia.
And now let's talk to economist Saul Eslake.
Well, Saul, why does Australia now have this housing crisis?
Well, in simple terms, because over a very long period of time, going back at least 30 years, growth in the demand for housing, fueled in part by rapid growth in the population, in turn largely as a result of high levels of immigration, but I would argue also fueled by other factors, including, by comparison with the 70s and 80s, low interest rates, ready availability of credit, and a whole suite of government policies that have inflated the demand for housing, particularly from property investors, but also from time to time from first home buyers, whilst at the same time, growth in the supply of housing has been constrained by a range of state and local government policies, particularly with regard to planning and zoning regulations in inner urban areas, but also local government and state government policies that have added to the cost of providing new housing, that in turn has adversely affected the supply of housing. So as with almost any commodity, when demand exceeds supply by a wide margin, the price goes up. That applies to housing for purchase, but it also applies to housing for rent. And as a result, we've seen, particularly in the last 2 years, surges in both house prices and rents that have been a factor behind the expected increase in and persistence of high inflation, but have also been a factor in growing rental stress and declining home ownership rates across Australia.
Well, indeed, the last inflation figures show rents had gone up by the most in 15 years.
That's right. And that reflects a combination of very significant increases in demand for rental housing that are in turn in large part driven by the surge in immigration that's occurred since Australia's borders reopened after the end of the COVID pandemic. And most of that surge in immigration has been students and temporary workers who are likely to rent because they don't plan on staying here permanently. But even among permanent arrivals in Australia who typically have the capacity to purchase their own home, they're going to want to rent for a while until they decide where they want to buy the home in which they will ultimately live. Whilst at the same time, we've seen a decline in new housing supply, in part because of higher interest rates, but also because of the difficulties that have been caused for building companies by the interaction between fixed price contracts for sale and surges in the cost of building materials and workers who work on building sites. So that sent a number of dwelling construction companies to the wall, and that in turn has been one of a number of factors that have resulted in the level of dwelling commencements and completions falling far short of what's required to accommodate the growth in the population.
Well, you talk about policies. Would these include the negative gearing policies engendered by the Howard government, the Costello budgets?
Oh, it would certainly include those. I wouldn't want to say that it's the single most important factor, but in particular, the decision in 1999 to change the capital gains tax regime, which Paul Keating had introduced in 1985, from one which taxed capital gains at a taxpayer's full marginal rate less an allowance for the impact of CPI inflation on the price of the asset, to one which taxed capital gains at half the marginal rate that a taxpayer would otherwise pay, with no allowance for inflation, which for most of the period since then has been relatively low. That converted negative gearing, which had been around at least since the 1930s as a strategy that allowed people to defer tax by offsetting net rental income losses against their wage and salary income, to a strategy which allowed people both to defer tax and permanently reduce the amount of tax they would pay by converting wage and salary income taxable in the year in which you earn it at your normal marginal rate into capital gains taxable at a year of your own choosing when you sell the asset at half your marginal rate. So not surprisingly, in the decade after that change was made in 1999, the proportion of taxpayers who were landlords increased from less than 15% to over 20%, and the proportion of landlords who were negatively geared rose from less than 50% to a peak of 70%. That's fallen away quite significantly over the last 12 years because interest rates have declined to such low levels that in 2021, the last year for which we have this data, the proportion of landlords who were negatively geared was down to 47%. But I have absolutely no doubt that when figures for the 2022-23 financial year are released in about 18 months' time, we will see that the proportion of landlords who are negatively geared has gone up to at least 65% and probably higher. So in the aftermath of that change, on occasions we saw the share of housing finance going to investors rising to as much as 45%, whilst the share of housing finance going to first home buyers in some years dropped to less than 12%, because investors were able to outcompete prospective home buyers in purchasing homes, knowing that unlike first home buyers, their interest costs were in effect subsidised by other taxpayers through negative gearing. So that's certainly been a factor. Other government policies that have contributed to the needless inflation of the demand for housing have been the recurring cycles of first home owner grants. So whenever it's looked as though housing might be about to get cheaper, that is, prices fall, governments, federal and state, Labor and coalition, have stepped in with enlarged grants to would-be first home buyers, the value of which has ended up in the pockets of vendors, or in the case of new homes builders and land developers, and the home ownership rate has continued to go down. Now, as I say, they're not the only factors behind the current housing crisis, but they have been contributors to it that are the results of conscious decisions that governments have made.
Which is why people buying houses and the younger generation can't afford to get a property, whereas the boomers already have a property as a result.
That's absolutely right. And indeed, a significant proportion of the boomers have more than one property, that they are among the 20% of Australian taxpayers who own at least one investment property, and many of them own 5 or more investment properties. And the published figures on home ownership, which show that Australia's home ownership rate has declined from a peak of 72% in 1966 to about 66% of the 2021 census, actually conceal a much sharper decline in home ownership rates among younger generations. So the home ownership rate among people aged between 25 and 34, the traditional first home buyer age cohort, at the 2021 census had fallen back to where they were at the census of 1947. The home ownership rate among people aged 35 to 44 has fallen back to where it was at the census of 1954. And the home ownership rate among people aged 45 to 54, who we would call middle-aged, is now back to where it was in 1961. The reason the home ownership rate for the population as a whole hasn't fallen more than the 6 percentage points or so that the census tells us is because the proportion of the population who are aged 65 and above, among whom the home ownership rate has been pretty steady over the last 60 years, has more than doubled over that period.
And so the younger generation will be forced into a situation where they have to keep paying higher rents.
Well, that's one outworking of the way in which the housing system has operated against the interests of young people over the last 30 years in particular. But there are others. Those young people who are able to get into home ownership have to accumulate much bigger deposits and have to take out much bigger mortgages, the servicing of which consumes a bigger proportion of their incomes than when the baby boomers were buying their houses. And that's on top of the fact that the younger generations now also have to contribute to superannuation. And if they've been to university, pay off HECS and HELP debt, which the baby boomer generations either didn't need to because they benefited from free tertiary education, or they got their jobs without needing a degree in order to qualify to do them. The other consequences have been an increased proportion of people in their 20s and even 30s living at home with their parents, or needing to rely on the so-called bank of mum and dad in order to variously stump up the deposit required to qualify for a mortgage, to borrow directly from parents themselves, or have parents guarantee the mortgage so that their children don't have to take out lenders' mortgage insurance. And of course, all of those things depend on whether your parents are in a financial position to be able to offer that assistance to you.
Well, the other thing is, the government has a big project to build millions and millions of new homes, the federal government and state governments for that matter. But builders tell me that they're not going to get to that figure because basically the costs are too high to give to clients. And secondly, they can't get tradies. They can't get sparkies. They can't get plumbers. And that's an issue for them.
It certainly is. And while I have absolutely no criticism of governments for having ambitious targets to add to the supply of housing, and especially to the supply of affordable housing, simply promulgating a target isn't going to ensure that the supply of housing eventually becomes sufficient to meet the demand for it. Builders are constrained by shortages of materials, by shortages of appropriately skilled labour, and by the costs which state and local governments impose on them through taxes and charges to get permission to build properties and to equip them with the infrastructure that you need to make a house or a flat or a block of flats livable. And if governments don't turn their minds to solving those problems, then they're not going to meet the ambitious targets they've set for themselves, and the housing problems that we face not only won't be solved, but will probably get worse.
Well, Saul, this is fascinating and important stuff. And thank you so much for your time.
That's been a pleasure, as always, Leo.
So what's happening in the news? Well, the cheap Aussie airline Bonza, which is majority owned by Florida-based private investment firm 777 Partners, has appointed a voluntary administrator to run the discount regional airline after the company behind its aircraft provider repossessed its plane in Australia, leaving thousands of passengers stranded on Tuesday. That's not such bonza news for travellers wanting to connect from Avalon to the Sunshine Coast or at Melbourne Airport, who are struggling to find another airline to take them on their much-needed holidays. Planes registered to Bonza remain grounded at the Sunshine Coast, Melbourne and the Gold Coast after a former investment partner of the discount airline's private equity owner, partner 777 Partners, repossessed them. Some while passengers were still on board. We've been informed this morning that effective at 3 a.m. today that all our aircraft have had repossession proceedings commenced by AIP Capital, the aircraft lessor, Bonza Chief Executive Tim Jordan said in an email to staff. This was a surprise to both ourselves and 777 Partners. We are currently assessing all options and we will provide an update here just as soon as we have more information available to share. As a consequence to this, all first-wave flights from bases have been cancelled. So what do we know about Bonza's owners? As well as aviation interests, 777 has invested in the British Basketball League, several sports clubs around the world, including soccer clubs in Spain and the Melbourne Victory Soccer Club in Australia. It also offered to buy Liverpool-based Premier League club Everton last year and has loaned the club hundreds of millions of dollars. 777 Partners touts itself as providing cutting-edge digital data science and marketing methods that unlock trapped value and enables extraordinary growth. Bonza Planes were initially bought by 777 Partners during the COVID-19 pandemic and designated to the leisure carrier on long-term leases. But earlier in April, 777 Partners creditors created a new vehicle to take control of 30 MAX 8 aircraft linked to 777 Partners. Administrator Hall Chadwick said planes would remain grounded until May the 2nd and advised passengers with bookings not to go to the airport. It is still being considered whether to keep trading, including the employment of all staff. Virgin Australia and Jetstar scrambled to repatriate stranded travellers for free on Tuesday after being asked by Transport Minister Catherine King. Bonza's backer, Miami-based 777 Partners, appointed KordaMentha earlier this month to evaluate its options after its fleet of Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft were rolled into a new vehicle by its senior funder. The formal appointment of Hall Chadwick as voluntary administrators means KordaMentha will step back from its advisory role. And Star Entertainment Group chairman David Foster has been removed from his position by the company's board, days after he tried to justify text messages that called for the scrapping of the casino regulator and removal of the manager controlling the Sydney casino licence. His successor, Anne Ward, was named on the same day that a New South Wales casino inquiry heard former Star boss Robbie Cook ignored advice and the job almost killed him, according to fellow director Deborah Page. Mr Foster, who became chairman in March last year, was insistent last week that he was best placed to steer the Challenge Casino Group forward, despite admitting he was trigger-happy with his text messages and conceding the Sydney casino was unsuitable to regain its licence. David Foster was removed as chairman of Star over the weekend. Ms Ward last week revealed she was in a minority in her desire to remove former chief executive Mr Cook in December. The board went without Mr Foster and resolved to change the chairman, Ms Ward told the Independent Inquiry on Monday. Members of the board had come to the view that new leadership was required, and that was the decision. Ms Ward was elected over the weekend and confirmed Mr Foster would continue with his executive responsibilities and stay on board until a new CEO was found. Mr Foster has taken a temporary leave of absence from his other chairman positions at UE and Bendigo and Adelaide Bank. Ms Ward is currently chairman of ASX-listed e-commerce group Redbubble and communication software provider Symbio. She was formerly a director of Crown Resorts. My vision for a transformed staff would be one where businesses are compliant with all relevant regulations and obligations, where there is strong leadership in place at all relevant levels, and where there is an open, honest and constructive relationship with relevant regulators, Ms Ward said. Mr Foster's removal comes a week after he conceded to the independent inquiry run by Adam Bell SC that the gaming giant was unsuitable to operate a casino in Sydney. Mr Foster was also questioned about a series of heat-of-the-moment texts between him and Mr Cook that discussed the removal of Sydney's special manager Nick Weeks and a potential class action by shareholders. Since December, Star Entertainment has lost CEO, Chief Financial Officer, Chief Legal Officer, Chief Customer Officer, Chief Transformation Officer, Chief of Staff, and the CEO of its Gold Coast precinct. And the federal government will strengthen Australia's 000 emergency system and roll out new rules mandating how telcos communicate with their customers, after it accepted all 18 recommendations from review into last year's national Optus outage. More than 2,000 Optus customers were unable to get through to emergency services during the November the 8th outage, sparking widespread frustration with the telco and raising fresh questions about the reliability of Australia's 000 system. A subsequent probe led by telecommunications veteran Richard Bean into the outage has recommended a raft of reform for the sector, including the establishment of a 000 custodian, 6 monthly end-to-end tests of the 000 system, and new requirements for how telcos communicate with their customers during an outage. Complaints handling will also be standardised after many Optus customers were left disappointed by the company's offer of 200 gigabytes of extra data in compensation. And Twitter Australia is expected to be wound up by the end of 2024 after new documents filed with the corporate regulator show it reported just $3.4 million in revenue in the first half of 2023, plunging more than 80%. These documents represent its final submission up before being taken private. Twitter was absorbed by Elon Musk's X Holdings 2 company and delisted from the New York Stock Exchange in October 2022. The chief executive of SpaceX and Tesla, Mr Musk paid US $44 billion for Twitter. He cut roughly 80% of Twitter's staff over the months that followed, as well as most other costs. In the chaos and controversy, many advertisers pulled advertising from X. A glimpse into the Australian entity presents an undesirable business. With $3.4 million in revenue, Twitter Australia Holdings spent $1.2 million on sales and marketing, $285,000 on administration, $99,000 on research and development, and $21,000 on anything else. Its operating profit for the first 6 months of 2023 was $1.9 million, almost all of which went to the tax office. Its net profit was $4,804. Salaries were slashed 87% to $1.2 million from $9 million. Bonuses were cut to $258,000 from $1.4 million, an 82% fall. Marketing expenses were cut 93% to just $61,000 from $821,000. Facilities expenses were slashed by 99% to $2,880 after the axe fell. Most employees were working from home. It even saved thousands of dollars on its audit bill by switching from KPMG Australia to RSM Australia Partners, which billed $25,500 in 2023. Twitter paid $1.5 million as a dividend to its parents in 2023, and the financial statements said it paid $2.9 million in January 2024. After paying more than $1 million to its executives in 2022, and despite having a listed managing director for Australia, Angus Keane, there were no key management personnel identified in 2023. Twitter has always been a relatively tiny part of the Australian advertising landscape. In 2021, Twitter made $14.8 million in revenue in an advertising market worth $19.7 billion, according to PwC estimates. Twitter's cash flows reveal it received $8.2 million in receipts over the half, down from the 2022 calendar year's $21.6 million. The local company reported no revenue-generated activities from July the 1st last year, being in the process of winding up. Financials lodged with the Australian Securities and Investments Commission were prepared on a non-going concern basis. Twitter Australia's Holdings has ceased all revenue-generating activities effective from the 1st of July 2023 and is expected to deregister the company in 2024. Mr Musk, who has been battling with the Australian Government and the Safety Commissioner over allowing violent videos on their platform, told them to go F yourself. And the corporate watchdog has raided a Gold Coast-based cryptocurrency miner, which allegedly encouraged investors to put their super into crypto products without a financial license, amid fears $62 million put in by savers would disappear. The Australian Securities and Investments Commission obtained federal court orders this month to have an insolvency and advisory firm, McGrath-Nicol, appointed receivers of NGS's digital assets, which a corporate regulator alleged was the best way to protect assets that are at risk of dissipation. More than 450 Australians invested about US $41 million, that's $62 million Aussie, in products offered by blockchain mining company NGS Crypto. ASIC alleges an NGS group of companies provided financial advice without a license. ASIC alleges a group of NGS companies targeted Australians to transfer money from regulated super funds to self-managed super funds to invest in blockchain mining packages with fixed-rate returns. Two directors of the NGS group of companies have previously been involved with now-defunct investment companies. One of the businesses went under with the two directors owing $500,000 via their own drawing of funds and intercompany loans to their related companies. McGrath-Nicol has been appointed as receiver manager over the digital assets of NGS Crypto, NGS Digital and NGS Group, based in Hong Kong, where Brett Mendham, Ryan Brown and Mark Ten Caton are sole directors respectively of the three companies. The court has ordered the companies and their directors to hand over all books and other records related to digital currency assets. This includes passwords and credentials for any crypto or blockchain assets. The court also ordered the companies and directors be prevented from shifting any crypto offshore or selling any digital currency assets. The orders do not prevent NGS and its directors from paying out Australian investors in its blockchain products. However, they prevent NGS from advertising, promoting or carrying on any financial services in Australia. Mr Mendham and Mr Ten Caton, also known as Ten Caton, are also former directors and shareholders of World Binary Exchange, which was wound up by ASIC in 2018, and Australian Global Markets, which had liquidators voluntarily appointed in 2013. Mr Brown was not a director or shareholder of either company, according to ASIC documents. And the growing scandals now swirling around leading shopping giant Super Retail Group, is quickly turning into a soap opera akin to titillating TV show Married First Sight than the operations of one of Australia's biggest retailers, with fresh accusations of a cover-up of an alleged undisclosed affair between Super Retail Chief Executive Anthony Heraghty and his former head of human resources, victimisation of whistleblowers and misleading investors about the true goings-on at the company. In another sensational day of claims and counterclaims that has now bedeviled Super Retail since Friday, when a string of salacious and other improper workplace behaviours were announced to the stock exchange, specialist workplace law firm Harmer's Workplace Lawyers has revealed they have proof that an undisclosed intimate relationship did exist between the CEO, Mr. Heraghty, and the retailer's chief of HR, Jane Kelly, and that the, until now, secret relationship has been disclosed to some members of the Super Retail staff. The board of the Super Retail has allegedly known of the relationship since December 2023, despite Super Retail's strident denials of that very relationship until as recently as this month, Harmer's said in a statement on Monday. Harmer's, which is a specialist workplace law firm that has carved out a niche in sexual harassment cases, also claimed on Monday that a third party, not connected to Super Retail, has now come forward with key evidence of the undisclosed affair, which is put to the retailer. This is despite the Super Retail board having investigated the claims of an affair and reporting to the ASX that it found no evidence of the romantic tryst nor any other workplace grievances. The board backed the CEO completely on Friday, but now faces a strong denial itself and counter-attack from Harmer's on behalf of its clients and claims of fresh evidence that proves the affair existed. The fuse to the somewhat lewd and increasingly nasty legal fight was lit on Friday when Super Retail outed itself to the stock market by disclosing it was now facing a legal threat from Harmer's on behalf of a number of Super Retail executives, claiming bullying, excessive workloads, improper use of company travel, and capped with a staggering allegation of the affair between Mr. Heraghty and his head of HR, Miss Kelly. Miss Kelly is not reported to be one of the employers represented by Harmer's and left the company in late 2023. Last week, Super Retail strenuously denied the allegations as well as the illicit affair and said the law firm could launch a legal case and claim loss and damages for its clients of $30 million to $50 million. It said it was awaiting to be served with legal documents and a statement of claim in the courts, both of which are yet to materialise, but strongly defended the CEO before the market and investors to report no evidence of any wrongdoing has been found by the board and its external investigative advisors. However, Harmer's has now returned fire and on Monday warned that Super Retail was causing further damage to its clients and that it has informed a number of Super Retail board members and the company's former external auditor about the allegations that range from the illicit affair to misuse of the company's travel budget. In a fresh statement issued on Monday, Harmer's revealed it is acting for 4 Super Retail employees and that another person unconnected to the retailer has now come forward with key evidence about the previously undisclosed personal relationship between Mr. Heraghty and his former direct report, Ms. Kelly. We are confident that other current and former Super Retail staff will support our clients' claims, the Harmer's statement said. Super Retail has now admitted to unnamed staff that the affair between the CEO and his former head of HR did in fact take place, despite repeated public denials. And that's it for this week. And next week I'll be talking to Future X Collective co-founder Angela Ferguson about the challenges of the hybrid workplace. And I will talk to RMIT economist Sinclair Davidson about the challenges for Jim Chalmers' next budget. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from my website, leongettler.com. If you like Talking Business, please leave us a review with Apple Podcasts. Thank you in advance. In the meantime, you can catch me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube. And if you want, leave a comment. If you want to contact me, email me at leon@leongettler.com. I answer all emails. Wishing you all a safe and healthy week and looking forward to bringing you Talking Business next week.